the Opening Market Podcast on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Dustin Huffman, being joined by Joe Camp of Commstock Investments. A little bit of green on the screen in the grains here at the break. What are we seeing, Joe?
Leadership from wheat futures, once again, a connection to the war in Ukraine and this disruption of exports from that key Black Sea region. We're talking about previously up to a third of global wheat shipments coming out of the Black Sea, up to a fifth of the global corn trade with Russia and Ukraine, such key producers, but other areas as well encumbered. We're talking about Romania, Kazakhstan, a whole host of grain growers that are at risk of this conflict spreading further. They have broken what was previously the last basically 3 years a tacit agreement not to target these shipping lanes. And well, again, some attacks from Ukraine and Ukrainian drones on the Kerch Strait, which is heavily relied on by Russia. Russia having previously retaliated and probably threatening to do so again against Ukraine's infrastructure, including, like earlier this month, some grain silos and sunflower seed oil tankers that were hit. So that's leading to this war risk premium re-entering the mix for wheat futures. We had already observed throughout the month of July from low to high, $1.25 plus for Chicago wheat futures, and that's helped out the corn and soybeans. So far, they're up in a turnaround from what was a more negative day leading in on Wednesday. This thought that we're going to get some rain. We'll see about that. It's expected to start in the west tonight, and it'll all be about confirming that and verifying this forecast ahead to give the market its tone heading into the weekend.
You know, it's a perfect storm of that weather premium, that war premium. Of course, U.S. Launches a counterstrike against Iran overnight as well. And like you said, the fact that the weather's playing into it, I mean, obviously plants like the heat. They need that to grow, but this heat has been pretty stressful on them all, and they need some of those cooler nights back down into the 60s at least for them to be able to relax and be able to grow properly without that much stress, correct?
Such a critical stage of the growing season, absolutely. And we're transitioning into just as important as the month of August. We think about soybeans being made in August, but as you allude to, already stress on these crops for corn, the pollination phase in so many areas. We've gotten to a stage now where we can assess where we've been to date, and we know we're lacking generally on rainfall and that we're exceeding norms in terms of temperatures, including temperature lows overnight, which can stress the crop. This is going to be a subject, of course, of yield expectations being honed into the fall harvest and starting with already the August 12 crop report. Surveys start going out, but there's also a reliance on a model-based yield that does account for what we talked about in July precipitation and temperatures as well. So to feel like, for corn in particular, that we could start to see yield potential docked, that's not out of the question, and it's been an underlying source of support for this market, which is why we can see prices still holding gains from where we were last year. A different trend where as last year, many years, we see this consistent slide into the summer months based on comfort growing about crop prospects, but that's the reverse of what we're seeing now. Possibly, though, with the relief of that rain we talked about coming this weekend, which is why so much is riding on the precipitation totals over the next, say, 3 days.
All right, and then moving over to the livestock side of things, obviously, cattle has had a couple of down days and now getting a little bit of a boost. But, yesterday the Secretary of Ag goes to Arizona as part of the gradual reopening of the border that they're going to do and talk about some more sterile fly releases. Plus, this heat is stressful on those animals, especially cattle have to bear the brunt of it, those who are out in the pastures and even the feedlot animals. I mean, what kind of pressure is weather putting on, and what is the trade looking like? Let's start with the cattle side of it.
Yeah, to start with the weather stress, so we feel that on an individual level, talking with producers that have death loss. We think that'll be a bigger issue when you aggregate that, say, and start to account for it in lost numbers going forward, like, say, on the next cattle on feed update, or just generally speaking, the stress on weight gains and how we've already been on this trend lower. Of course, a turn down from such high numbers that were achieved in weights leading into just a couple of months ago. But this temperature extreme now even weighing further on production to pair with the smaller numbers that have already been that fundamentally bullish point of the market for so long. Up until just recently, right, we're talking still about the live cattle futures having gone on an unprecedented slide lower for the nearby August contract. It was 15 days straight down. We had a mixed set of reports last Friday, and then as we touch on the phased reopening of the Mexican border following the screwworm threat and the developments there, what we think about that would be still almost 4 weeks to go until that starts, and no mention yet of a timeline for Texas. So, unfortunately, a lot that could go wrong, like the last phase reopening. So, what we have this morning would be higher prices for now, and this possibility of having now 3 days in a row of a turnaround.
And we talk so much about the fact that the herd is so small right now, but there hasn't been much incentive to rebuild. I mean, what is it going to take? In a situation, I know it's going to take lower prices to probably get them to get more rebuilding of the herd, but I mean, what is it going to take to get to that point right now?
That's right. A structural shift in the market that encourages retention. You have that balanced against where we have stress once again for pasture across the South, and now the ebb and flow of what could be more numbers coming in terms of feeder cattle from Mexico into the picture. So, yeah, it's an open question and still is the same question that we've had now for basically 3 years, where we thought, could we start to see some traction develop on rebuilding the herd? Well, finally, that cattle inventory report showing after 6 of the last July reports being on a decline, a small fractional turnaround. So maybe you could see some light at the end of the tunnel, but we know from the history's sake that it's a slow ride here, and it's going to take a lot to get these numbers up, and especially in the face of what we see as such robust and resilient demand on both the consumer end and on exports as well.
And then before we wrap up here today, Joe, what is it looking like in the hog markets? They've had some positive days and then had a little bit of a turnaround yesterday.
Yeah, I think some technical pushback here because we have had a healthy retracement. It was such the slide lower that we're talking about 3.5 months, almost all down. And then a turnaround here as we headed into July, what we knew would be a breakdown in the production fundamentals, a trough overall for numbers seasonally, and that helping the market. It helped as well that we had the clearing out of the fund position mostly passed and put behind us. They reached almost a record net short and then started to start covering and taking the other direction. But then yesterday, having been turned down, I do factor in the technical nature of it, that the stock market was sharply lower yesterday, that we still have that general nervousness about the economy that might be impacting the meat trade here overall. And you see opposite of cattle, some red on the screen again today after, again, technically speaking, yesterday completing a 62% Fibonacci retracement that those speculators like to keep a close eye on.
And then I guess before actually one last question, we had the Fed announcements yesterday. I mean, anything in there that agriculture industry and should be looking at from that economy standpoint?
I think assessing the potential for nervousness that can create a negative overall financial market environment. We know that interest rate expectations are going to do that and set the tone for the wider market, including commodities, because of the interconnections with, say, the dollar index and how that adjusts the terms of trade for our exports and the attractiveness or not of investment capital coming into the space. I think we've got some relief after having that Fed meeting in the rear view now and some more time until the September interest rate decision, but it is something worth watching where it can get in the way of everything, whether it's weather or export demand or biofuels. So good to think about what's going on with the Fed meeting and the aftermath this week.
All right. Well, Joe, if folks want to get any more insight into what you guys are looking at with the markets, what's the best way to get some of those numbers and information from Commstock?
Yeah, access to our Commstock report, all of our contact info, it's up at commstock.com.
All right, Joe Camp, Commstock, our guest today. Thanks so much for the insight. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Thanks, Dustin. You too.
And again, Joe Camp of Commstock Investments. Let's take a look at the numbers. September corn up 2.5 at 451.5. December new crop up 2.5 at 474.25. August beans up 2.5 at 1180.5. November new crop up 3 3/4 at 1196.5. Soybean meal is trading at 50 cents lower at 314.80. Soy oil 9 cents higher at 69.26. Chicago wheat up 12.5 at 673.25. Minneapolis spring wheat is trading 12.5 cents higher at 717.5. Kansas winter wheat, they are trading 15 cents higher at 740.5. Kansas spring wheat unchanged at 703 even. Live cattle trading $1.60 higher at $229.50. Feeders up 87 cents at $345.15. Lean hogs down $1.72 at $98.95. Pork cutouts unchanged at $114.87. Class 3 milk down 2 cents at $16.56. Thanks again to Joe Camp of Commstock Investments joining us on today's Opening Market Podcast from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Dustin Huffman. Have a great day.